It was May 27th, 2020. In Scottsdale, Arizona, the heat of the day was just beginning to settle into a warm desert evening. For Alysha Cordova and her two children, Cruz and Capri, it was a typical Wednesday. Nick Cordova, a 40-year-old father and business owner, was still at his office at Gilbert Air Heating and Cooling. He was a man who worked long hours, sometimes leaving before the sun came up, but he never missed the chance to see his kids' faces before their bedtime. At 5:25 p.m., the kids initiated a FaceTime call to show their dad a new trick they had learned on TikTok. Alysha was nearby in the kitchen, half listening to the sweet, mundane chatter of a father and his children. It was a scene of domestic peace, mediated by a smartphone screen. But 3 minutes later, at 5:28 p.m., the atmosphere shattered. Capri's voice changed. She didn't sound like a child playing anymore. She said, "Something is wrong with Dad." Alysha grabbed the phone. On the screen, she couldn't see Nick. The camera was pointing at the ceiling, or perhaps it had been shoved into a pocket. All she could see was a blur of white. But she could hear. She heard muffled noises, yelling, and the sounds of a violent struggle. Imagine the helplessness. You are staring at a screen, hearing your husband being attacked in real time, miles away. Alysha didn't hesitate. She grabbed a second phone and dialed 911 at 5:30 p.m. "I'm on FaceTime with my husband. Someone came in and started beating him. I think they had a gun." On the other end of that FaceTime call, Alysha heard Nick moaning. She heard a voice she recognized. It was Nick's business partner, David Sweetman. She screamed his name through the phone, begging for an answer, begging to know if Nick was okay. Dave, is he okay? Is he breathing? Dave, answer me." By the time the police arrived at the office on West Guadalupe Road, the silence was absolute. Nicholas Cordova was dead, lying on the floor of his own business with a gunshot wound to the head. This was not a random act of violence in a dark alley. This was a targeted execution that played out while a man's family watched and listened through a digital window. Today we step into the evidence locker to look at the murder of Nick Cordova, a case where the evidence points to a cold-blooded conspiracy and the shadows of a past tragedy loom large over the suspects. Who was Nicholas Cordova? To understand the weight of this loss, we have to look at the man behind the business. Born in 1979, Nick was a Scottsdale native through and through. He was an athlete at Chandler High, a wrestler and a football player who carried that physical discipline into his adult life as a personal trainer. Eventually, he found his calling in the HVAC industry. He wasn't just a boss. He was a jack of all trades who personally worked on units and cared deeply about his employees. He co-owned Gilbert Air, a successful company that he had built through sheer grit, often telling Alysha that his goal was to retire early so he could spend every possible second with her and the kids. He was the glue that held his family together. He was famous for his signature phrase, "Fudge ya," a clean alternative to a curse word because he refused to swear in front of his children. After his death, his family wore shirts emblazoned with the phrase, a heartbreaking tribute to a man who lived for his family. There was no reason for Nick to die. According to Alysha and everyone who knew him, he had no enemies. He wasn't involved in anything shady. He was a straight shooter. But as the investigation began, it became clear that while Nick might not have had enemies, he certainly had someone in his life who had a lot to gain from his absence. When the first officers from the Gilbert Police Department arrived at the Gilbert Air offices on West Guadalupe Road, they didn't find the chaotic scene of a typical smash-and-grab robbery. They found something far more clinical and far more chilling. The office, usually a hub of humming activity where technicians were dispatched to save residents from the Arizona heat, was deathly still. Nicholas Cordova was found in the back. The scene showed signs of a struggle, overturned items, the physical debris of a man fighting for his life. But the ultimate cause of death was a single, devastating gunshot wound to the head. As detectives began to process the scene, they started cataloging items that would eventually fill a 300-page police report. They found various cell phones, some still active. They found envelopes that were thick with cash. This is where the robbery gone wrong theory starts to bleed out. If you are a criminal desperate enough to walk into a business in broad daylight and execute the owner, you take the money. But the attackers left the cash behind. It sat there on a desk, a silent rebuke to the idea of a random heist. And then there was the potato. Investigators found a potato with a hole bored through its center. In the grim underworld of contract killings and DIY assassinations, a potato is a well-known, if primitive, tool. It's used as a makeshift suppressor, a silencer. You press the muzzle of the gun against the vegetable to dampen the muzzle flash and the report of the shot. The presence of that potato transformed the scene from a possible robbery into something far more sinister. A calculated, premeditated hit. It suggested that whoever walked into that office didn't just happen to have a gun. They had a plan to kill Nick as quietly as possible. But there was a witness. David Sweetman, Nick's business partner, was the only other person in the building when police arrived. Now you have to understand the dynamic here. Sweetman was the silent partner. He did own 50% of the company, but according to Alysha and the employees, he was rarely ever there. He didn't run the day-to-day. He didn't manage the crews. But on May 27th, the day Nick was killed while on a FaceTime call with his children, David Sweetman was in the office. His account to the police was harrowing. He claimed that two guys had entered the building. He told officers that he had been knocked out from behind, blindsided before he could even see their faces. He said that while he was incapacitated, one of the men attacked him while the other moved in on Nick. When he came to, the attackers were gone, and he found Nick's phone, the FaceTime call still live, and heard Alysha's frantic voice screaming from the speakers. Detectives noted that Sweetman appeared shaken. He turned over his own weapon to the police, a 9mm Sig Sauer handgun. He was handcuffed, placed in a patrol car, and taken down to the station for questioning. In his initial statements, he insisted it was a robbery, despite the thousands of dollars in cash left untouched. He described the ordeal as the most traumatic experience of his life. But while Sweetman was being questioned, Alysha was living a different nightmare. After the call cut out, she had bundled her children into the car and made the 20-minute drive from Scottsdale to Gilbert. When she arrived, she saw the yellow tape. She saw the flashing lights. She tried to duck under the cordons, asking the officers where the ambulance was. Where had they taken her husband? The officers didn't answer right away. They just looked at her. And in that silence, Alysha knew. A detective eventually approached her and confirmed the unthinkable. Nick was dead. As Alysha stood on the burning summer pavement, her world collapsing, the police were already grappling with the central mystery of the Gilbert Air crime scene. How did two men get into a locked office after hours without Nick getting up from his chair? Why leave the money? And why was the silent partner who never worked out of the office the only one left alive to tell the story? The partner was cleared as a suspect in the weeks that followed, but for many looking into the evidence locker, the math didn't add up. If David Sweetman was truly a victim, he was the luckiest man in the room. But if he wasn't, then the motive for Nick's death was buried somewhere much deeper than a simple robbery. It was buried in the fine print of a $3 million life insurance policy. In the immediate aftermath of a murder, investigators look for the three pillars: means, motive, and opportunity. The means was a firearm. The opportunity was an after-hours meeting in a quiet business park. But the motive? That's where the trail leaves the blood-stained office of Gilbert Air and enters the sterile world of insurance adjusters and legal filings. It turns out that in the months leading up to his death, Nicholas Cordova had become worth significantly more dead than alive. Let's look at the paper trail. In September 2018, shortly after Nick became the managing co-owner of Gilbert Air, he applied for a life insurance policy. At the time, the policy was valued at $3 million, and the beneficiary was clear: his wife, Alysha. It was a safety net for a young family, the kind of responsible planning you'd expect from a man who lived for his kids. But just 3 months later, in December 2018, everything changed. A new set of documents was filed. The beneficiary was no longer Alysha Cordova. It was changed to the business entity itself, Gilbert Air LLC. In the industry, this is known as key person insurance. It's a common business practice. The idea is that if a vital partner dies, the business receives a payout to stay afloat, pay off debts, and find a replacement. But here is the critical detail that Alysha would later highlight in court. She claims she had absolutely no idea the change had been made. She was the one who managed her household, who knew their finances, yet she was reportedly left in the dark as her family's $3 million security blanket was signed over to the company David Sweetman co-owned. After Nick's murder, the numbers began to swell. While early reports cited $3 million, later investigative findings and community outcries suggested the total coverage across various policies might have been as high as $8 million. Think about that figure for a moment. $8 million. It's an astronomical sum, a motive that transcends a simple business dispute. The tension between the grieving widow and the surviving partner didn't take long to boil over. According to Alysha, David Sweetman began pressuring her to file the insurance claim almost immediately after the funeral. He didn't just want the money, he seemed to be in a hurry. Alysha alleged that Sweetman approached her with what she described as a dubious deal. He reportedly offered her $500,000 payout from the insurance proceeds, a fraction of the total, if she would simply sign off on the claim and walk away without a fight. To Alysha, it didn't feel like a gesture of kindness. It felt like hush money. It felt like a settlement intended to keep her from asking why the beneficiary had been changed in the first place. Alysha refused. Instead, she hired a lawyer and filed a civil lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court, Alysha Nicole Cordova versus David Michael Sweetman et al. The lawsuit was a bombshell. It alleged that the beneficiary change was fraudulent and that Nick may have been misled into signing the documents, or that his signature was secured under false pretenses. This wasn't just about the money anymore. Alysha was effectively pointing a finger at the financial heart of the case. The legal battle dragged on for years, a grueling process of depositions and hearings while the criminal investigation into Nick's murder seemingly stalled. In court, Sweetman's defense maintained that the insurance was a standard business arrangement and that he had cooperated fully with the police. Ultimately, the civil case ended with a whimper rather than a bang. In May 2024, a stipulation for dismissal was filed. The case was closed. Reports indicate that the payout was eventually split between Alysha and the business, but the damage was done. The insurance dispute provided the why that the empty cash envelopes at the crime scene couldn't. It painted a picture of a man who was an asset to his family, but a massive, multi-million-dollar liability to his business. In the evidence locker, money is the most consistent catalyst for betrayal. And in the case of Nick Cordova, there were 8 million reasons to want him out of the picture. In the world of criminal investigation, we are taught to look for patterns. A single tragedy is a misfortune. 2 tragedies centered around the same person is a statistic that demands scrutiny. As the community of Gilbert, Arizona struggled to make sense of Nick Cordova's murder, people began to look back. They looked back 7 years before the FaceTime call, to 2013, when another person in David Sweetman's inner circle met a sudden, mysterious end. Her name was Dr. Laura Lisa Sweetman. She was 42 years old, a brilliant pediatrician who had dedicated her life to the most vulnerable among us. To her patients, she was a literal lifesaver. Parents described her as an angel who could calm a screaming child with a single gentle word. She was a woman of science, of logic, and of immense compassion. She was also David Sweetman's wife. On December 9th, 2013, the light went out for Laura. Her obituary is a masterclass in professional brevity. It speaks of her medical degree from St. George, her residency at St. Joseph's, and her reputation for caring for adolescent patients. But it is notably silent on one crucial detail: how a healthy, vibrant 42-year-old woman simply stopped living. At the time, her death was not treated as a homicide. The official record leaned toward a tragic, natural occurrence or a sudden medical event. But in the tight-knit neighborhoods of Gilbert, the story was different. Whispers began to circulate almost immediately. Whispers that grew into a roar after Nick Cordova was killed. The word that kept coming up was drowning. There were rumors of a mysterious drowning under circumstances that felt wrong to those who knew her. But the physical act of her death wasn't the only concern. Investigations and reports made by community members pointed toward a darker domestic reality. There were allegations that in the months leading up to her death, Laura Sweetman was planning to leave David. There were reports of a domestic dispute, a situation so volatile that Laura had reportedly expressed fear for her safety, alleging that physical threats had been made against her. Imagine the parallel. In 2013, a woman who reportedly wants to leave David Sweetman dies under, quoted, mysterious circumstances. In 2020, a business partner who was worth millions in insurance money and who might be planning an early retirement that would take him away from the business is executed in his office. When Nick was killed, the ghost of Laura Sweetman became a central figure in the court of public opinion. People began to ask, was Laura the first? Was her death the blueprint? In the evidence locker, we see this time and again. An offender who gets away with it because of it. Reminder to navigate an investigation, how to speak to detectives, and how to position themselves as the many of the residents speaking out that the water and the investigation. By 5:30 p.m., Alysha was on the phone with 911. Whoever attacked Nick had entered the building, committed the murder, and vanished in under 5 minutes. But as the suspects fled the business park at Neely Street and Guadalupe Road, they left behind a trail of conflicting steel. Witnesses near Gilbert Air initially reported seeing two men leaving the parking lot in an older model, white single-cab pickup truck. However, as the Gilbert Police Department scoured security footage from the surrounding area, a different vehicle emerged as the primary focus, a two-tone red and silver Ford F-150. Police began canvassing neighboring businesses, showing images of this red truck, believing it was the true getaway vehicle used to spirit the killers away from the scene. The most chilling evidence, however, was captured just 3 minutes after the 911 call. At 5:33 p.m., a man casually walked into the Arco gas station less than a mile from the crime scene. Surveillance footage, clear and close up, shows a stocky man, approximately 5'8", of Hispanic or Native American descent, wearing a blue t-shirt and jeans. He didn't look like a man who had just participated in a brutal execution. He was nonchalant, casually speaking to the cashier to put money on a pump before walking back out to his vehicle. Why would a murderer stop for gas less than 5 minutes after the crime, in plain view of high-definition cameras? In the evidence locker, this behavior suggests one of two things: either extreme arrogance or the practiced calm of a professional. This has led investigators and the Cordova family to a dark theory. The man at the pump was a hired gun. The theory suggests that the two suspects were not local criminals looking for a quick score, but contract killers brought in specifically for this hit. This would explain the presence of the potato suppressor found at the scene, a professional's tool used to muffle the sound of the fatal shot. It would also explain why they were so unconcerned about being caught on local cameras. If these men were professional hitmen, their plan likely didn't involve hiding in Gilbert. Some investigators speculate that the suspects may have immediately headed south, crossing the border into Mexico shortly after the murder. If they were already across the border by the time the surveillance footage was released to the public weeks later, they were essentially ghosts. They had no ties to the community, no local records, and no reason to fear a silent witness tip from a neighbor. But the question remains: if they were hired, who held the contract? A professional hitman doesn't work for free, and they don't pick targets at random. They are an extension of someone else's will. The nonchalant man at the Arco station wasn't just buying gas, he was finishing a job. And as he drove away in that red and silver truck, he left the Gilbert police with a grainy image of a face, but a total vacuum of identity. Nearly 5 years have passed, and the reward for that identity has climbed to $20,000. But for a man who may have been back in another country before the sun set, money may not be enough to bring him out of the shadows. When a crime scene is processed, every object tells a story. Some speak clearly: a shell casing, a fingerprint, a blood splatter. But in the murder of Nick Cordova, the evidence locker contains items that defy conventional logic. Investigators compiled a massive report, over 300 pages detailing the debris of a life interrupted. Among the phones and envelopes of cash left untouched by the robbers, police found a single bizarre object: a potato with a hole bored through the center. In the world of clandestine hits, a potato is a makeshift silencer, a primitive way to muffle the crack of a gunshot. It suggests a killer who didn't want to be heard, someone who came prepared for a quiet execution in the middle of a busy business park. And yet, the silence from the police department has been even louder than the crime itself. For years, the Gilbert Police Department has sat on a critical piece of evidence: high-quality surveillance footage from inside Gilbert Air. While the public was shown a grainy man at a gas station, The internal tape remains under lock and key. Alysha Cordova was only recently allowed to view it after years of pushing, but the department refuses to release it to the community. They claim it could jeopardize the investigation, but to a grieving family, it feels like the walls are closing in to protect the case rather than solve it. Then there is the matter of the only witness. David Sweetman told officers he was knocked out from behind before he could see the attackers, yet he remained alive while Nick was executed. He turned over his own 9mm to police that night. Just an hour before the hit, employees reported a closed-door meeting between the partners that grew, quote, louder than normal. Sweetman was briefly detained, his hands cuffed, but he was ultimately cleared of immediate suspicion. In his own words, it was a horrible situation, but he declined to speak further, leaving investigators to wonder if the partner was a victim of circumstance or a master of the knockout narrative. 5 years. In the lifespan of an investigation, 5 years is the border between active and cold. But for Alysha Cordova, time hasn't healed the wound. It has only sharpened the frustration. She has watched the case shuffle through 4 different detectives, each transition a fresh start that leads back to the same dead ends. She feels the investigation has been brushed under the rug, a sentiment echoed by a community that has grown tired of the Gilbert PD's silence. But Alysha refuses to let the silence win. She has launched a campaign called Noise for Nick, utilizing social media to ensure her husband's face remains in the public eye. On specific days, she organizes phone trees, where dozens of community members flood the Gilbert PD phone lines, asking one simple question: who killed Nick Cordova? They have taken their plea to the Gilbert Town Council, demanding accountability for a department they feel has done too little for too long. The family doesn't just wear their grief, they wear his legacy. At press conferences, they gather in shirts bearing the license plate phrase, "Fudge ya," Nick's signature way of celebrating without swearing in front of his kids. It is a reminder of the man he was, the glue of the family, a father who was taken while his children watched through a digital window. Today, the reward for information stands at $20,000, bolstered by the family's own contributions. The investigation is technically still active, with police claiming they are working with state and federal agencies, yet no arrests have been made. The civil lawsuit against David Sweetman was dismissed in May 2024, leaving the financial questions of the $8 million insurance policy hanging in legal limbo. In the evidence locker, the file on Nicholas Cordova remains open. It is a story of a FaceTime call that never ended, a potato silencer, and 8 million reasons for betrayal. But most of all, it is the story of a family that will not stop making noise until the man from the Arco gas station, and whoever sent him, is behind bars. If you know anything about the murder of Nick Cordova on May 27, 2020, do the right thing. Call Silent Witness at 480-WITNESS, because in the end, the only thing more powerful than the silence of a killer is the noise of a family seeking justice. This podcast is written and hosted by me, Shay, and edited by my husband, Toby. Give us a like and follow, and leave a review. It really helps weirdos like me to keep researching even weirder cases like this. This has been The Evidence Locker. I'll see you next time. Stay curious, stay safe. Join us next week as we open another locker.